Go up to the top and then just pause or stop.
And so we'll just move on to approval of the agenda.
Yeah, here we go. Approval of the agenda.
Chapin, we needed a note saying saying you're muted. Oh, it's okay now.
Are there any revisions to the agenda?
There are none from staff.
Are there any, moving on to approval of the minutes?
We do not include any in this packet. We should have a good bulk of minutes from previous hearings, previous meetings in the next meeting.
I'm gonna move on to the public comment section for items that are not on the agenda.
So if anyone in the public would just like to provide general public comments for items not on the agenda tonight, I'm assuming most of you are in the audience or in attendance for the item on the agenda. But this would be appropriate time. If anything, just general regarding planning, zoning in the city, now's your opportunity. And then just open that up to anyone online.
Is anybody online that's interested in making any public comments not on the agenda this evening? Raise your hand. Seeing none. Hearing none. Let's move on to new business. Bridgehaven Emergency Shelter CUP at 105 Spruce Street.
Excuse me, if we're gonna have a meeting, can we speak up here?
Can't hear you well.
I mean, you know, you're mumbling down there, but we're not gonna mumble.
There's not public comment allowed at this time.
Yeah,
Point well taken. Moving on to new business. I'll repeat myself. Bridgehaven Emergency Shelter CUP at 105 Spruce Street. This is the public hearing for that. It's gonna be moving on to you with the staff report.
This time you would just read the opening remarks for the public hearing.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Scott Bauer, and I am the acting chair of the Leadville Planning and Zoning Commission. This is a public hearing before the commission to consider a proposed change of use for the property located at 105 Spruce Street by advocates of Lake County, represented tonight by Tim Best. When the public hearing is opened, I will first attend to some preliminary housekeeping matters. I will then ask for the staff to discuss highlights of the staff report, followed by the applicant to make a brief presentation on their proposal, followed by public comments from members of the public in attendance. Public comment may be limited to 2 minutes per person. Timing will be monitored by staff, and an audible tone will signal the end of your comment period. This is to ensure fairness and equity to each member of the public. All participants are encouraged to employ respectful language, conduct themselves in a manner that upholds the dignity of the commission, the applicant, staff, and other members of the public. Comments should be directed to the commission and not to the applicant, staff, or audience. The applicant shall have an opportunity for rebuttal, which is the applicant's opportunity to respond to any comments made by members of the public. After the rebuttal, I will close the public comment portion of the public hearing and allow commissioners an opportunity to ask questions of the applicant and staff. Once the public comment portion of the hearing is closed, we will not accept additional public comments unless it is reasonable to questions posed by the commission with the applicant. Staff will have an opportunity for clarification, rebuttal, which is staff's opportunity to respond to any comments made by the applicant or members of the public. At the conclusion of our questioning, the Planning and Zoning Commission will deliberate and render a recommendation to City Council to decide to continue the hearing. The recommendation will be forwarded to the City Council for a public hearing. The City Council will make a decision on January 21st, 2025 at 6 p.m. during the regular City Council meeting. The public hearing is quasi judicial, which means that we have to follow certain procedural requirements to establish a record. For this reason, it is important that when you speak, you clearly identify yourself and your physical address. Are there any questions about the public hearing procedure?
You said 2 minutes, the sign behind you says 3.
So I'm reading through.
I'll explain this. The commissioners have 2 hours tonight for this hearing. And so for this specific, because we were anticipating a lot of public comment, and we anticipated a lot of the public comments would be repeating previous public comments. So in order so that everyone could be heard in a timely manner, we reduced that to 2 minutes so that everyone has an opportunity to speak tonight.
Other questions?
Could I sign up to speak and relinquish my time to someone else?
Sure. Moving on. Notice and posting requirements. Notice of this hearing is required to be published in the newspaper at least 15 days prior to tonight's meeting. In addition, the property must be posted and notification to all property owners within 200 feet of the property must be sent. Mr. LaChance, have all these requirements been satisfied?
Yes, they have.
Evidence of notice is hereby made a part of the record, as are the application materials, the Leadville zoning ordinance, the Secretary of Interior standards for treatment of historic properties, any correspondence received prior to the published deadline, and in the course of tonight's hearing, and any other documents, photographs, or other materials introduced at the hearing. I will now open the public hearing for a proposed change of use for the property located at 105 Spruce Street. At this time, I ask that the Planning and Zoning Commission to disclose any ex parte communication or conflict of interest with the applicants.
Good.
No. Your commissioners online?
No.
No. Okay, well, will staff please present the staff report highlights?
All right, thank you, Acting Chair Bauer, for getting us started tonight. For the record, for the members of the audience and for the Zoom participants, my name is Chapin LaChance. I'm the Director for the Community Development Department. Here for the city of Leadville. With me tonight is Alex Willis, our Planner 1. So the city has received, as most of you are aware, an application for a conditional use permit for an emergency shelter, which is most closely categorized as a group home within our zoning code. So that's what we'll be reviewing tonight. And the Planning and Zoning Commission will be making a recommendation tonight to City Council. So conditional use permit is required for this type of use in order for that use to begin on the property. So that's what we'll be evaluating tonight, and we have code criteria that we'll discuss. So this is a proposal to change the use of a portion of the property, not the entire property. The property is owned by the school district, and the school district does intend to maintain the existing use in the northernmost portion of the building. But the southern portion of the property, including the southern portion of the existing building is proposed for the use to be changed. There are not any proposed exterior or site modifications with this proposal. It's interior only and the use. This property is about 7/10 of an acre. So that's about roughly 30,000 square feet. Again, that's not just that's the entire lot that the school district owns. This is within the R2 zoning district, and you can see the zoning map on the screen, highlighting the property, and all the properties surrounding this are within that R2 zone. R2 is our traditional residential zone. So this is a mixed use zone. This is not necessarily like a predominantly or exclusively single family residential zone. That would be like our R1 zone. So just to describe the property, shown on the screen here, that northernmost part of the structure is about 7,000 square feet. Let me just find my cursor here. And then the portion of the building that's proposed to be used for emergency shelter is just under 3,000 square feet, shown here. There are existing parking spaces. There's an existing paved area just along the entire length of Spruce Street. And the school district owns both sides of Spruce Street and has facilities on both sides. As I mentioned, the use, so we talked about zoning, but in terms of the existing uses surrounding this property are predominantly single-family residential dwellings, with the exception of the school district facility on the east side of Spruce Street. So in your staff report, you have photos of the property just to acquaint any of you that haven't visited the site. But just to talk a little bit about short history of the property. This building was constructed in 1960. I won't go into any of the, it is in the historic district, but I won't go into the historical district components of this. Since 1960, it's predominantly used as the school district office building until it was used as the Get Outdoors Leadville offices. And then it's been sitting vacant since 2021, since Get Outdoors Leadville vacated the building. So I'll start talking about some of the definitions that apply and then the code criteria for review tonight. I'm gonna pull up the applicable definitions in our code that we need to consider tonight. So as I mentioned, this is proposed as an emergency shelter. The most closely related definition that we have in the code would be a group home. As the commission may remember, in last year, the council passed an ordinance that rearranged our definitions with the intent of helping us analyze proposals that we did not have specific definitions listed in code. So we have use category definitions in addition to use type definitions. So generally, the two things that could potentially apply here would be group living and household living as our use categories. This most closely relates to the group living category, and this would not meet the household living definition. And then moving on to our actual use type definitions, this most closely meets the group homes definition, although the group homes definition does not obviously does not line up specifically with this use. You'll note in this group homes definition on the screen that it limits the occupancy to I think disabled persons would be the best way to summarize that. Elderly persons or children. And then there are some distance requirements for if, for example, for elderly, not having another elderly facility within 750 feet. The applicant does not propose to limit the occupancy for this use to disabled, to children, to elderly. And so, but this is our most closely relevant definition in our zoning code. I should say it's typical for city zoning codes to not have a definition for every single use that is out there. So what I've offered to the commission tonight is that I do believe that for the proposed emergency shelter, the group home definition within the group living category under the residential uses is the most closely relevant use definition that we should be reviewing for tonight. So I will start talking about code criteria and want to put on the screen kind of description of the R2 zoning district, again, that traditional residential zoning district. The description, you'll note here, I'm just gonna highlight with my cursor. It does talk about a predominantly residential district that still is mixed use in character. The existing use is a mixed use. There are residential and essentially governmental or institutional uses kind of happening adjacent to each other. So the zoning district does, just in its general intent statement, does contemplate that, does call for that. Although this is not a code criteria for approval, just let you know that's the intent of this zone, is to have some mix of uses, not predominantly residential. All right, so now getting into specific criteria. The first criteria in your code, I'll leave this on the screen for a second, and then I'll put something else up. But the first criteria in the code for conditional use permits is regarding compliance with the zoning regulations. And this is really talking about our dimensional standards. So this would be things like building height, setbacks. But the proposal is not to make any site modifications, so a lot of those won't apply. The one thing that does apply, it's important to talk about, is density. We have a density limitation. And really what that means, density is an expression of how intensely a property is used. And we use units per acre, so dwelling units per acre, as an expression of how intensely a property is used. So in the R2 zoning district, there's a limitation of 19 dwelling units per acre, and we calculate that on a per lot basis. So you're trying to interpret what the proposed density is for this project and how that would meet the or not meet the density limitations. The applicant proposes 6 dormitories. I believe one of those is for staff. And each of those is in their operations plan is proposed to have an occupancy of 2 to 6 occupants per dormitory. So if you, I guess if you do the math, the proposed density would be 13 dwelling units. The allowed density would be 13 dwelling units on this property if you multiply that times the acreage. And the proposal is 6 units. So proposed 6 units, allowed 13 units. So if the commission were to interpret the dormitories as dwelling units, similar to an apartment, like an apartment unit, you could interpret that under code, a multifamily 13-unit apartment building would be allowed on this property, would require a conditional use permit. But a 13-unit apartment building could be allowed. And the proposed use has a density of 6 dwelling units. Again, if you interpret those dormitories as apartment units. So I just offer that for consideration. If that's the way the commission interprets this, then they could be found to be in compliance with the density limitation. Again, there's no site modifications, so the rest of the zoning dimensional standards would not apply. And I'm sorry, I meant to pull this up on the screen. This is the applicant's site plan. And you can start to see again on the southern portion of this site, how the floor plan shows on the site plan. So where how these 6 units would fit into the building and how the existing building fits into the overall site. The next criterion in our code, I'll just leave this up on the screen while we talk. The next criterion in the code for approval is compliance with the comprehensive plan. The city has a comprehensive plan that has goals and addresses all kinds of things for our city, for our community. One of those goals, and I've quoted this in your staff reports, goal 2.14, just paraphrasing here, promotes the diversity of housing types for different economic and housing needs. Another goal is directs the city to work with local housing organizations to establish a supply of housing for special needs populations. There's a lot in the comprehensive plan, but this is just one specific goal regarding special needs housing groups that's called out. So I put that in your staff report for consideration. The city just completed, in partnership with the County Regional Housing Authority, completed a housing needs assessment. And the final version of that was published this fall, I believe. In reviewing the housing needs assessment, which is a really important document for looking at our overall needs for a full spectrum of housing. I looked to see if there was a section regarding, homelessness, unhoused, and anything related. And again, this is relating back to compliance with the comprehensive plan. The housing needs assessment does identify survey respondents who are identifying as either homeless or precariously housed. And so that assessment shows 22 members of the community identifying as homeless, and then 33 identifying as precariously housed. So if we're looking at the goals of the comprehensive plan, staff is offering for consideration that that goal could be, or this proposal could be interpreted to be meeting that goal for providing housing for local housing and working with local housing organizations to identify special needs housing populations. I didn't find anything else in the comprehensive plan that would kind of look at this the opposite way or would conflict with that. So that was really the only thing I found, within the housing needs assessment that applied to this particular application. Still under the comprehensive plan, we need to talk about the future land use map. The comp plan does call out, so this is not zoning, but for any kind of zoning decisions. This provides kind of higher level guidance on, this is a guiding document on how to make these kind of decisions and interpretations. So the on screen is the future land use map from the comprehensive plan. The red arrow points to the location of the site, so it's within the town site mixed use area of the future land use map. Description for that is that it is characterized by a variety of mixed uses. So again, we start to see the mixed uses theme come up. And it says by directing traffic intensive uses, and just reading from the upper right hand corner of the screen here. By directing traffic intensive uses to block corners and providing adequate parking and landscaping, residential and non-residential uses can continue in the area. And as you can see from the map, that it's intended for that area to be kind of linear east to west along that corridor. So, clearly identifies block corners, adequate parking, landscaping as important mitigation items for kind of proposed uses that would be traffic intensive. Or just generally in order for mixed uses to be compatible in this area. So there's an existing school district use on the property, of course, so it already creates that mixed use. There are more intensive uses than, the existing uses are more intensive uses than the single family uses that are surrounding the property. And it's also worth noting that that existing non-residential use, the school district's uses are on the block corners as the comp plan is calling out for it. So that's kind of already working in the favor of the future land use map. So that, staff acknowledges that the proposed change of use would certainly, has the potential to increase the intensity of use of the property and traffic to the property, whether foot traffic or vehicle traffic. And also increasing parking demand and evening parking demand, people arriving after normal business hours and departing before normal business hours. So again, this is still in the comprehensive plan discussion. We're gonna talk about parking later because we have a specific section on parking, so I'm just gonna talk about the landscaping because it is mentioned that landscaping is important. This property does not have any. So staff is recommending a condition of approval that if this application were to be approved, that landscaping should be required in order to mitigate some of these potential impacts of this use to the adjacent lower intensity uses. And we'll pull the exact verbiage up on the screen, but I've generally the condition of approval regarding landscaping for buffering. If landscaping were to be incorporated, that should be evergreen trees near the property lines, the property limits, that can, and this is, staff is not stating this would absolutely mitigate all impacts, but this could considerably help with things like vehicle lights, just basically visual and audible, thank you, sorry. Then we'll talk about parking later. So if the condition of approval regarding landscaping is incorporated, staff would find that assuming we talk about the parking requirements later and it complies. That this is generally meeting the comprehensive plan requirements because of meeting the special housing needs. Because of being on block corners, adequate landscaping, and again, assuming it addresses the parking requirements. Moving on to criteria C, which is, and this is a very general statement, consistent with and in harmony with neighboring land uses. So, this is a proposed 25-person shelter adjacent to single-family uses, and I think the closest home, I think, structure is within 60 feet of this building. So there's the potential for impacts. These impacts, should be considered in your recommendation tonight. And there could be the opportunity to mitigate these impacts so that the use could be compatible. We just have to get into the specifics of what those impacts are and the opportunity for mitigation. So I think it's important to consider that this is a proposed shelter during winter months. There's a good chance that most of the occupants, most of the time, would be interior to the building. But with an hour and a half of checking in and departure, both for staff and the clients, 5:30 to, I can't remember the hours, 5 to 5:30 in the evenings and 8 to 9 AM approximately. That's a very intense time where there's a lot of comings and goings on the property, and that there could be several impacts here, but that's probably one of the impacts that should mostly be considered is the coming and goings. And that is with the assumption that during the evening hours, again, because the purpose of the shelter is provide interior shelter, that most of the occupants will be interior to the building and not loitering about the site. So I'm going to pull up the conditions of approval that staff is offering for consideration. Conditional use permit, in its very name, intends for conditions of approval to be utilized for, because a conditional use permit is generally a use that has the opportunity to create impacts to neighbors, but they are generally unique uses. And so the whole intent of the conditional use permit is so that the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council can consider the unique use and require unique conditions in order for that use to not impact adjacent or properties or the neighborhood. So on your screen, and this is page 15 of your packet. I've included a list of conditions and I've discussed these conditions with the applicant. I'm not going to read all of these. They're on the screen. I will discuss some of the important ones, but generally, and this kind of lines up with discussion in your staff report. The opportunities for impacts to neighbors here are like loitering, any kind of exterior congregation of people coming to the site, not going directly into the building and hanging out outside. And again, that check-in queue of right after business hours of people arriving at the site for evening shelter. And then also parking being another big category. And parking could extend to not just a parked car, but vehicles coming and going from the street back onto the street for parking, for ingress and egress. So under loitering / congregating / checking queue, I have included conditions. So this generally is the operations plan should be revised prior to this use being initiated. And just kind of going down the list here, we need some definitions on what the property is, what the premises are. That the queue for people checking in for shelter should be interior to the building only. So in other words, should not be occurring outside of the building. That probably creates a very big potential for impact to neighbors. And I think this is in the operations plan, there's procedures outlined for if for some reason some of the shelter it is required to be to ask to leave the shelter. That if that is a safety concern for the community or for the occupants of the shelter, that law enforcement be considered. And I think this that one right there is possibly one for discussion. There are some conflicts in the operations plan when I reviewed it regarding, regarding. Smoking and, I guess, tobacco and vaping. So generally, if the intent is for that to not be allowed, the operations plan needs to be consistent throughout the operations plan, to not allow those things. And then the landscaping that I recommend as a conditional approval. I would say the operations plan needs to basically address how that landscaping would be maintained. So they the trees don't get installed and then die in a year or two. Moving on to the parking category. Parking always has an opportunity to impact adjacent neighborhoods or adjacent properties if that parking spills over from the site onto the streets. Into people's driveways, et cetera, so that's definitely something that should be strongly considered. So generally, I'm recommending a condition that no on-street parking be allowed for clients in the building. And we'll get into the parking requirements, the number of spaces. But that off-street parking in off-street parking spaces on this property be the only way the occupants are parking for this facility. Requirement that no animals are left in people's cars. So if they're living out of their vehicles at other times and they have an animal with them, that animal is not left inside the vehicle while they take shelter. Just clarification that prohibited items, drugs, alcohol, weapons, etc., that are not allowed within the shelter also be prohibited on the premises to include vehicles. And then lastly, just no inoperable or abandoned vehicles being left on the site. That may actually be an improvement to the property. Then just generally here, the departure time for staff coming and going, if that's not, some of that is not specified in the operations plan. So if there are a vehicle or two turning on headlights in the middle of the night, that has the opportunity to impact neighbors. So that needs to be clarified what those arrival and departure times are for the overnight staff. And then just generally, if there's any signage on the property, especially signage that is lit, backlit, et cetera, that needs to go through sign permit through the city because we have rules on that. So with those conditions and not, staff is not saying that is necessarily an exhaustive list, but that's staff's best, I guess, attempt at addressing all the potential impacts. But again, conditions of approval would be appropriate with a conditional use permit before a unique use. So moving on to basically traffic hazards, that's another criteria in the code. I'm gonna pull up the site plan again, just so we have a visual, but this site essentially right now has a 100% like paved connection to the street. And so if vehicles were parking on the property and then backing out on the street, if multiple vehicles were leaving at the same time, particularly if multiple vehicles were leaving at the time that the school district buses are in operations, there's the opportunity for conflicts here. And that is a concern for staff, but I think it's something that it is easily mitigated. So the good news is that the parking spaces are paved, so there's no additional paving that is required. But there needs to be some kind of control for traffic coming in and out of the site, especially with the intensity of the use increasing on the property and the other existing uses on the property and across the street. So painting is a minimum a summertime solution for that. And generally mid-block access is preferred, and vehicles entering and exiting close to the intersection of the street is not safe or is not preferred. So what staff is recommending is that this site plan be revised, and I'll actually pull this one up on the screen. This site plan be revised prior to operation of this facility and get approved by the city to have essentially a defined driveway connection to the street to minimize any of those potential conflicts, knowing that there may be pedestrians coming to and fro and other vehicles on Spruce Street, vehicles leaving and coming at the same time, and then buses using this area. Opportunity for conflict unless we're using creating a defined driveway entrance. starting to wrap up here in the criteria, the last criteria is again, another general criteria is regarding public health, safety and welfare. And not causing hardships for neighboring persons. So, we have included conditions that, address, some of these public health, safety, welfare concerns. And these impacts and hardships to neighboring properties and persons. So I won't restate all the conditions of approval that I just stated, but one, staff understands that, this proposed use, can create concerns for neighborhood residents. And those concerns, are likely related to property values, increased crime, nuisances, et cetera. So there is research on this. This is, the first proposed emergency shelter in a long time, if ever, in Leadville. So this is not like we have a long history of evaluating these types of uses like we do for single family homes or commercial businesses. The American Planning Association provides a lot of resources for city planners who are evaluating unique applications. There's the American Planning Association generally references some Urban Land Institute research and reports regarding homelessness and homeless shelters, and when you're evaluating these types of applications. One of those reports references a fairly well-known it's the US Department of Housing and Urban Developments, the acronym is HUD. It's a HUD report, and actually it looked at supportive housing in neighborhoods in Denver and impacts on neighbors. I provided a link in your packet for that. I'm not going to pretend like I'm the expert on that report, but generally the executive summary of that is, if I had to boil that down into one sentence, is that report, which again is kind of like the recommended report to look at when you're evaluating this, is that supportive housing does not decrease property values nor increase criminal activity. I will leave that report for your own review. It's included in your packet. So generally speaking, with the conditions of approval that we've already discussed, staff is generally compliant, finding that this proposal will comply with that criteria with those conditions. And again, this is regarding public health, safety, welfare, and hardships to neighbors. The last criteria is under the conditional use permit criteria is access. No concerns there. This property is surrounded on 3 sides by paved streets. So in the event of a fire, emergency, et cetera, emergency vehicles will be able to access the site very easily. Last requirement, this is outside of conditional use permit, but this is just regarding parking. What I'm going to get to is essentially there's 2 opportunities for the commission to recommend a parking requirement. Because we do not have, kind of like the use type, we do not have a specific parking requirement, off-street parking requirement for emergency shelters or group homes. The first method is basically just going to be based on the closest thing that we have in the code. And then the second thing is just kind of coming up with a custom parking requirement based on the proposed dormitories and dormitory occupancy. So on the first possibility here, again, we do not have a parking requirement that's specifically enumerated for this in our code for this type. We do have multiple family dwellings for elderly, handicapped, or disabled. And that use is right next to retirement home, senior living. So there's a possibility that you could connect it with the parking requirements that are similar to that, which would be 1.75 parking spaces. And again, that's for a dwelling unit for a multifamily apartment for elderly, handicapped, or disabled. So if that's the requirement that you're using, multiply that times the 6 proposed dormitories, and that comes up with parking requirement of 11 spaces, and we have to round up. So the applicant proposes 11 parking spaces, and those can be seen here on the screen. Starting here at 1, and then number 11 down here. So under that interpretation, the proposal meets the parking requirements. It should be noted that those parking spaces would be used during the evening, And so the school district would have the opportunity to use those during the daytime as well as just any volunteer staff that's coming to the shelter, once it's empty. And then the second possibility here is that, perhaps this is more restricted, perhaps this is more, realistic, is that we look at the number of vehicles that people are bringing to the property based on the occupancy of the dormitories. And let me, just gonna pull up a chart that I included in your staff report, so you can see that in the code. I'm sorry, see that on the screen. But we could look at the 6 dormitories. So you have male, female, gender neutral, and then 2 families and a staff dorm. Those occupancies range from 2 to 6 per dorm. But if you were to go through and apply the realistic parking expectation for each of those dorms, doing one for each family dorm, but basically one vehicle per occupant of all the rest of the dorms, then you come up with a occupancy of 23 people, which is under 25 proposed, and parking demand of 16 vehicles. So in that case, the proposed 11 spaces would not meet the parking requirement. And I'll just quote this one sentence in the code, because this is important. The planning commission is allowed to come up with a custom parking requirement. If you follow along right here, it says requirements for types of buildings and uses not specifically enumerated shall be determined by the city council upon review and recommendation from the planning commission, based upon requirements of comparable uses, etc. So this is one possible parking requirement, again, because there's not a specific parking requirement listed for this type. So that's a question that I have for you tonight, is what is the parking requirement? Because parking is one of the things that could create impacts on the neighboring property owners. The last thing I will say, just in terms of considering the valuation of this, is, and I've included this in your staff report, there are fair housing laws that Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council is required by law, the federal laws, to abide by. I've kind of in bold on the screen, I've put some of the things that you need to consider. Some of these are more specifically regarding persons with disabilities. But generally, you should abide by fair housing laws when you are making a recommendation, the city council is making a decision. So, to kind of guide the discussion tonight, I have 3 questions for the commission. One is regarding the parking requirement. The second is regarding the conditions of approval that I had on the screen earlier, and then I included in your packet. And then the last question is just generally if you have any other concerns that were not addressed in this staff report. My recommendation tonight, just after I've reviewed all of the requirements, again, this is pending your responses to those 3 questions, because those are important to get through this discussion. But if you find that it complies with the criteria and it meets the parking, like including the parking requirement, that the commission should recommend city council approve. Again, if you find that it complies with the approval criteria as I've analyzed. That's it for staff. I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Sounds great, Greg.
Go ahead, Diddy.
I guess I have a ton of questions, but I'll just start with the 7,000 square foot building. Is that currently being in use? Or is that part of the vacancy?
It's currently being used by a school district for, how do I describe that? That would, maintenance.
Okay, just so facility. Okay.
Yeah.
And so those parking spaces, there's like 11 of them or
12.
yeah,
That
that are in front of that,
Yeah.
are dedicated for the school district.
Yeah,
And that's not part of this application.
correct. Yeah, I can pull that up in the site plan, but as I understand your question, yes, that's correct.
That's a question.
Yeah, I mean, if parking is an issue, it's like adjacent. It seemed to me that it's something we should discuss.
No, I see some inconsistencies in the diagram that I was looking at.
Okay.
It showed 7 residences, 7 dormitories, not 6.
Yeah.
What is the difference?
Let's see, and so are you looking at the floor plan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, cause I think one of them showed like a men's living area that included men's dorm. So is that a seventh dorm where people are living, or
That's what it
is
is.
that just the common space?
It looked like.
It's
common spaces
page
in the center.
21 has a diagram of it.
Okay.
That same diagram also referred to the zoning incorrectly as R1. You might want to clean that up.
All right, the operations plan and the site plans show 6. So that may be a good clarification for, when it's the applicant's, opportunity to answer questions from the commission. Because I think this conflicts with some of the others that show 6, most of the other information shows 6. For any reason it's 7, then, the commission should clarify that with the applicant.
Yeah, cause where I was going with that was, if it's 7. And code says you can have 2 to 6 per dwelling unit. Then it changes from a potential max capacity of. What is that, 6 times 6, 36. Versus,
The fire department says you can only
42.
hold 25 though.
oh, so that's where the 25 number comes from. So I was curious like where the 25 number comes from, is it?
That's my understanding is that, and I think there were referral letters from, including the fire department's responses. And that, for the IFC, the International Fire Code occupancy restrictions, based on that occupancy class, then the occupancy was limited to 25.
Okay.
And their plan shows a maximum of 23. Is what they actually plan.
Okay.
They've sent us.
That table that I have on the screen for the custom parking requirements that tallied to 23, that was my calculation.
Oh,
Yeah, in your staff report.
all right.
So yes, I think that's a good opportunity for clarification from the applicant.
Yeah, and I'm also curious to know from the applicant, like. What is the actual need? Do they know specifically, like concretely? Yeah, we know that there's demand for 25. Or is it actually 15? Or,
I think the applicant had prepared that as part of their presentation. That does not specifically fit into the code criteria. I talked about comp plan and the uses proposed to meet needs. But the criteria, it doesn't require the applicant to demonstrate the need for proposed use, in other words. So that is not a code requirement that we can base our decision upon. As I interpret the code, yeah.
You referenced a HUD document that you
Yes.
said was in the packet, but I don't see it.
It's a link.
It's a-
It's a
broken.
big, I included a link.
did you click on it?
No, I didn't.
I clicked on it, it doesn't go anywhere.
Okay.
Just say that.
Okay. I think it has the, I can send out that, the hyperlink again.
Questions right off? You want to think about that for a minute? Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
so Chapin, I was gonna ask you about like advisory member comments. Is there any, is that like,
The year script, is used for, Historic Preservation Commission also, we do not have an advisory.
fair,
For this commission.
to double check on that, cool.
Sorry, yeah, I know we're talking about code. Specifically, but I was just curious if. There is, what's like criteria for accepting people in? I know there's criteria for. Things that they cannot have when coming in, but is there? How many? Like if someone shows up like under the influence, like,
I was just gonna interject real quick, and this might be part of the presentation that.
okay, yeah.
In terms of applicant's presentation.
Yeah, either or, I think it can be both. It's my understanding that their operations plan that they've submitted as part of their application clearly communicates that the intent is for this to be a low barrier facility. So as that relates to your code and compliance, again, we start with the definitions and the The closest definition that we have is group home and, you know, and it talks about elderly children, so there's not something in between that defines a low barrier. So that's where we get in, so assuming that it meets the group home definition, then it requires the conditional use permit. But the code criteria for approval is not specific to group home use or emergency shelter use, or even like a low barrier facility for that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll keep my questions related to.
Okay.
As I said, this point in time, I'd like to ask the applicant to give their presentation. Sync up, sorry.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, commissioners, staff, and fellow community members. I'm Tim Best. I'm the director of the Bridge Homelessness Services Program at the Advocates in Lake County. In full disclosure, I'm also on city council serving Ward 2B. I have recused myself from any deliberations, discussions, and votes concerning this project. And if approval passes today, we'll be absent from any discussion on the city council side on January 21st. So Chapin laid out the sort of broad strokes of what we're planning. I'll wait for that to come up. Oh, there we go. You can go ahead and advance there, Alex. So I'm going to focus my presentation on more of the context of the project, and then I can answer any questions about the details of the project. So I have 9 slides here. Presentation should take about 10 minutes in 4 parts. I want to give an overview of homelessness in our community and what the need is. The formation and context of the Advocates Bridge Program, which is new. The Bridge Program services in the homelessness response system. And then lastly, I'll bring it back to the shelter specifically. Next slide, please.
Because this is on Zoom, it'll take a few seconds to advance.
Gotcha, okay.
I mean, there's just a delay.
Chapin mentioned that there was a housing needs assessment. The first draft came out in August of this year. It was run by Roots Policy Research and sponsored by the county and Lake County Village Generation. This was a survey that went out into the community with respondents. 22 of those respondents were self-reported as homeless. We think that is a massive undercount. This population is notoriously difficult to count. In that same report, 50% of our community reported as cost burdened. That means that they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. That's an astonishing number. And I think the reason I include that is what it indicates is this is a problem that's going to get worse in our community. Everybody acknowledges we're in a housing crisis right now. I think what we're slower to acknowledge as a community is that we're in a homelessness emergency that's accompanying our housing crisis. People are being priced out of their housing. On January 28th, in a few weeks, there's a point in time count that is a national effort every year to count every homeless person in the country. We participated in this in the past, but again, have had massive undercounts because we haven't had the broad organization in a program like mine in order to really reach every person that we already are aware is unhoused in our community. So we expect to count, 50, I think is a low number, but that number of 22 that's self-reported during the needs assessment is going to more than double. Next slide, please. One message that I really want to convey today is I think our community needs to massively adjust our perception of who the homeless community is in Leadville. Homelessness here does not look like it looks in Front Range communities and big urban settings. It's somewhat hidden, so I totally understand the perspective that I've heard recently, that we don't need this, it's not important, we don't have a homeless problem here. A lot of we do have some of the chronic unhoused folks that you see hang out in Zates Park or, taking advantage of some of the other resources in town. But there's a hidden problem of folks who were evicted, who are living in their vehicles, families who have been priced out of their housing and are staying in hotels. So what I would like to preach today is that when you're thinking of what kind of people are going to be staying at this shelter, it's our neighbors and friends who are being priced out of their housing. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I need to read this quote. So this is I did an interview with one of our clients this week, and one of the questions was, what is something you would like to know about homeless people that you would like the community to know about homeless people that you think they currently don't? And he wrote this. He was speaking writ large. I think this applies particularly strongly to Leadville County. Homeless folks don't all fit into a category. People make bad assumptions about homeless folks and why they're homeless. I met so many different people with different backgrounds, professional people who fell on hard times, families where the parents lost their jobs and couldn't afford to live, people with crappy backgrounds that never learned to live normally. People think homeless folks are lazy, and let me tell you, it is hard work. The winter, the cold, the rain, all the walking, finding resources, protecting yourself, it's a full-time job. I think everybody was a little cold when we got out this morning. It was minus 10 degrees by my thermometer when I woke up. Imagine yourself living out in the woods or living in your vehicle or an RV without electric hookup during the cold snap we're having right now. Next slide, please. So that brings me to our program at the.
Can I interrupt for just a second? The slides are not advancing on the Zoom.
Are they not?
Okay, thank you. We'll give this. I'm sorry for the.
It's all right. The Bridge Program is the outcome of a community-based initiative that was begun just before COVID times, when Lake County Build a Generation started a housing coalition. And then right after COVID, Christy Galarza headed up a homelessness subcommittee to address the growing homelessness crisis specifically. In 2023, they released a strategic plan. It's exhaustive. I'm happy to share it with any of you. And one of the many things that it identified was the need for one organization to focus specifically on homelessness. My boss, Jenny Abbott, who's here tonight, stepped up and offered that the Advocates, who are a victim services program organization since 1983, would take on this endeavor. I think it's particularly unique that a homelessness services program is housed within a victim services organization. Unhoused community members are the most vulnerable people among us and are the most victimized. They are victims literally of an unjust system. So this was in February 2024, so just 10 months ago. I was hired in mid-February. And our first task was to identify gaps in the homelessness response and create and develop solutions to fill those gaps. That a lot of that groundwork had already been done in the strategic plan. And we've been slowly at work doing this and creating the homelessness response, which is a community-wide effort since then. One of the things we did was created 2 working groups. These are outgrowths of the homelessness subcommittee, sort of lived on homelessness subcommittee 2.0. The first is a homelessness task force that is a high-level problem-solving, long-range thinking strategic group of stakeholders Many of them are here tonight. That includes every nonprofit in town, Full Circle, St. George's, Lake County Wraparound, Department of Human Services, Public Health, law enforcement, probation, and the hospital, as well as Sol Vista Health. This shelter plan is an outgrowth of the homelessness task force. This idea for this particular location came out of our very first meeting, which was back in September. The second group is a coordinated homelessness response team, which heads up something I'm going to talk about in a future slide called coordinated entry. Coordinated entry is a term of art in homelessness response that basically says that in any community, there needs to be one coordinated entry point to access benefits and services. It doesn't make sense for all these different organizations to have their own different pathways and referral networks. So basically what coordinated entry is a referral network. That's important to the shelter because it's this referral network that is going to bring our homeless community members to the shelter. Beds are going to be based on referrals through local organizations for local community members. The homelessness response team also does care coordination. The library is present. If there's folks that are hanging out at the library that need to be on everybody's radar, we'll bring them up and be able to refer them. They need to get their SNAP benefits or whatever, or they need access to some sort of housing. Next slide, please, Alex. So this is a map of our homelessness response. And I can see it's hard to read. Everything in the map is on the list on the right. So our homelessness response, and this is our community's homelessness response, I want to be clear. And not our organization or my program's homelessness response involves, ours here involves these 6 categories and program areas. Outreach is literally going out into the community and connecting folks to resources. This is what my staff spends most of their time doing. Bringing propane to folks that are living in vehicles and things like that. Getting minutes for folks to put on their phones so they can connect to employment, things like that. Prevention, the next bullet, is the most important intervention there is in homelessness response. The most cost-effective and best way to prevent homelessness is to keep folks in their housing. This is what we do the most. If I had my way, it's all we would do. The mission of our program, growing out of the homelessness subcommittee, is that homelessness in Little Lake County is rare and brief. So prevention is really where we want to put most of our money. That's important because that means we want to put the least of it into shelter. Shelter isn't solving anything, it's simply a crisis response of trying to keep people alive in perilous circumstances. The next bullet, transitional housing. This has been our most successful program. At our Bridge office, we call it Bridge House on East 5th Street, that's Judge Reynolds' old place. We are housing folks upstairs that were either homeless or at risk of becoming homeless, facing eviction and had nowhere to go, would have been on the street if we hadn't actually housed them. And we have them up there and we work on getting them ready to get into stable housing on their own lease. In the 10 months we've been operating, we have moved 12 individuals through our transitional housing program into stable housing under their own lease. That is really the goal of what we want to do. Of course, in the meantime, a lot of folks are going to need shelter. I already discussed coordinated entry, so then that brings me to the last bullet, which is crisis response. Crisis response has several components. A crisis hotline that the advocates have had for 40 years, that now includes a homelessness branch. Diversion or referral, this is, getting folks to some service. Do you have an aunt you can stay with? Do you have somebody in the state, somewhere else that can put you up? Trying to find some sort of extended network for the client that can help their situation. Safe to Park program, we don't have one of those here. in Leadville, Lake County, but we will be working on developing one. And that brings us to emergency shelter. Now, I've gone through this exhaustive discussion of our programs in order to place the emergency shelter in the context of everything we do. Emergency shelter is necessary. I would love to make it unnecessary. I would love to house our homeless. I think that's been demonstrated to be the optimal solution. But unfortunately, we need a crisis response, and that crisis response requires that we have an emergency shelter. When I talked about the gaps that we were looking at in homelessness response, it was really evident to me immediately that this is the main one. This is something we should have already that we don't. One last thing in the crisis response would be a warming shelter at our main offices at the Bridge House on 115 East 5th. We are opening up our middle room to a warming hut on days like this where it's kind of brutally cold outside. Next slide, please. So in April, we were getting so many requests that we instituted an online referral form. So that was, what, 9.5, 10 months ago. We've had 95 referrals since we instituted that referral form. Again, that should be a shocking number. These are people that are either housing insecure, imminent risk of homelessness, need housing support, or need street outreach, need a sleeping bag, boots, those sorts of things. Over half of those referrals were in the last 3 months. I believe that's because of the onset of winter and also just because word's getting out that we're successfully helping folks. Of those 95, 20 are currently waitlisted. We had to put a little bit of a moratorium on new clients at a very bad time because of my staffing limits and funding limits. Of those 20, many of them just simply need shelter. Like, we wish we could help you, but we don't have the resource to do that. Many of these are working poor, displaced by housing costs. They're living in camps, abandoned buildings, vehicles, or trailers. Many of them were evicted or quit the premises before they got evicted and need shelter while they figure out their next stage. That next stage might be relocated. We can help them with that too, actually. And then there is a small portion that are chronically homeless and just need refuge in extreme conditions. What we envision is that shelter usage will peak during weeks like this and probably go down to, just a few when the weather is nicer. And then, of course, we're only planning on being open between November and May. Last slide, please. So that brings us to the shelter specifically. A couple of points I want to make. First of all, as has been noted, I believe this is an overnight shelter with check-in and check-out. That is going to create pinch points at certain times. We've created enough of a window around each, an hour and a half for check-in and check-out to mediate those pinch points a little bit. Many of these folks have jobs and will need to get to their job. I want to point out that all major stakeholders in the community have had a voice in this process. That includes law enforcement, emergency services. The shelter is looped into the Lake County Emergency Management Plan, meaning that last summer, when we had the fire down in Twin Lakes, not only could have displaced families come to stay at the shelter, but first responders could have stayed there as well. And that's the vision that emergency management has for using this space for that purpose. I think I already said this, but this is something that really we should already have, but we don't. This is something a civilized community has for their most vulnerable citizens. These are people who have fallen through the cracks and need our support in order to stay alive during the winter. Because right now, tonight, they're in peril. Next point is that this is a refuge, not an oasis. This is not going to be a shining temple that people are going to come from all over the land to congregate in. It's going to be the bare minimum to get it up to code and get it habitable so that we can bring people inside when it's bad out. Next point I want to make is that this Spruce Street site is optimal for really one main reason, and that it is currently vacant. A vacant building in our housing crisis should be unacceptable to all of us. It has the potential of turning an unused facility into a community good. However, this building, and I don't want to speak for the school district, but this building this will be the last thing this building is ever used for. This is not a good building. We're able to breathe one last life into this dilapidated structure before it's demolished, which will probably be in just a few years. So we have a longer term vision of either acquiring or developing a site. You know, I wish we could pick an ideal building, an ideal site. This is it. There's no other choice. And chances are 2 or 3 years we'll be out of there into our more ideal site. Last point is that this is really early in the process. I've heard a lot of reactions that indicate that all this planning has gone on behind the scenes. Well, we have to do planning before we can bring something to the public. Imagine the opposite, that we brought this to the public and we haven't done any planning. I think this situation is a lot better. So this is early in the process. Assuming we get approval here today, we'll need approval from City Council, and I hope we have a rich discussion there as well. But there will be plenty of time for input and feedback. We do not have adequate funding to open the shelter yet. We do not have an adequate staffing plan. While I would love, once we get the City Council approval in a couple of weeks, we have to go back to the county for the building permit. Then we have to modify the site to bring it up to code, which is mainly ADA compliant stuff and some fire safety. Then we have to figure out, that's going to take months. So my message to the community and to the commissioners is that once we get approval here in late January, we're not going to be open next week. It's probably very, very likely that we won't be fully operational until November of 2025. That leaves plenty of time for neighbors, community members to express their concerns, for us to listen and adjust our operational plan, come up with solutions that work for everybody. And in that spirit, we have 2 things planned. Assuming we get both the approvals we need, we will have an open house at the site for neighbors where they can look at our site plan and our operational plan, make comments. We can make alterations and adjustments. And then sometime after that, we'll have a large scale community meeting to discuss the larger issue. Because frankly, I've been preaching this for now a year, and our community really needs to become more aware of this problem and embrace it. The way they embrace so many different things, like a pool, opposing the CJK milling. You know, our community needs to rally around this issue. So that's my presentation. I welcome any comments. I do have my contact info on the last slide, and I welcome anybody to reach out to me for that. I'm happy to discuss things personally with community members, neighbors, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. At this point in time, I'd like to open public comment
Well,
portion.
not quite yet. We may have questions for the applicant at this point.
Did you know? I think you had a question about the 7 rooms.
Yes.
If you could address that.
Oh, that is true.
So I think what might have been lost in the various site plans is that initially we were planning a phase 1, phase 2. The big room that I think you were referring to as the 7th room,
Right.
at least for the foreseeable future, is just going to be storage. And then if there's the need, we would like to open that up as another room. That would require extensive investment and renovation. We're not sure we want to do that. This is not a building we want to put a lot of money into. Frankly, it's not worth it, since it's going to be demolished in a few years. So actually, in truth, I think we've updated the site plan since you got this schematic. Really, for opening fully operational, we're looking at 4 doors. The one on the top left would be the staff room. I think that's already there. And then the one on the bottom right is going to be also storage. So, yeah, I mean, we need flexibility. We don't know how many people are going to show up on a -10 night, you know, so there's got to be some flexibility built into the plan.
So relative to parking, you have 11 spaces planned in your diagram. There are 12 spaces adjacent to that, that are part of the school district warehouse area. Has there been any conversation in terms of your lease with the school district about using some of those other spaces at night?
We don't anticipate needing them. Main reason being, I think 11 spaces is gonna be plenty because many of these folks are on foot.
You talked about in your presentation, 95 referrals since April. That's a lot. Do you track if any of those or how many of those are people who have come from out of town?
Well, our program is for residents only. We have a 6-month residency requirement with one exception. So street outreach is kind of the lowest level service we can do. Somebody comes in and needs a new sleeping bag or a tarp or a pair of socks. We can do that. That's very low, we're not gonna ask a lot of questions. But we have a wait list of folks who want to get into housing. It makes no sense for us to be bringing people here from the Front Range or elsewhere when we have locals that actually need support. So that said, this is a low barrier shelter. It's gonna be primarily filled through referrals from local agencies. We already know who most of these folks are. Yes, walk-ins will be possible if beds are available, and yes, some of those might be transient. I can tell you just in terms of the last year, we've had several folks come from the Front Range who are seeking transitional housing or some sort of other support or want to get on our list or whatever, and we bought them a bus ticket back to them.
Okay, I think that's important. It's important to me to know that. Thank you.
That's not to say that we would turn away somebody, I mean, this is an emergency shelter, right? It's about safety and survival. So if somebody showed up, we would try to accommodate them and then figure out what their next steps were, which is, I think, the main goal of all of the tenants.
The concern may be, and I don't know, making things up. We have people, and we know in the summertime, who tent camp in the forest. In
Yeah.
fact, all over the place, Turquoise Lake, up on the east side. Would this possibly encourage them to be here year round rather than leave it in the winter?
Well, I think that's based on an assumption that there are people who stay here during the summer and leave during the winter.
I'm pretty sure that's a good assumption.
I'm not sure it is,
Okay.
frankly, just based on the clientele that we support. But, I gotta say, as a refuge, not an oasis, I can't imagine anybody like, oh, let's go stay at the Leadville shelter. It's so wonderful. You know, it's gonna be a bare minimum of services there, to keep people safe and comfortable.
Okay, it's just a thought.
I'm good. Okay. All right then. At this point in time, I'd like to open it. Thank you. Thank you. Open public comment portion of the hearing. What's that?
Get with the room first.
So. I think we have a list. Yeah. Okay, we're just gonna work our way through the list. We're gonna limit it to 2 minutes. Gonna be on a timer. Just be respectful for everyone else.
Is there anyone who'd like to speak and has not had an opportunity to take on the list? Again, this is just so we can establish an order for those speaking. Okay, if you could add your name, please, and we will begin with Tony, last name starting with S. Personal list.
I'd like to go last.
Okay, sure. Are you doing it?
I'd like to.
All right, that's good. Oh, you're giving list. Tony, your last name here.
You just studied like to the last one.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were trying, I apologize. Next we have Alyssa Early.
I'm gonna have you hold just for a minute till Greg gets back, okay?
Absolutely.
Great.
Anybody else need to go on the list?
We're gonna start this out with your name and your address. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm Alyssa Early. I live at 517 East 12th Street in Leadville. I'm also the pastor at St. George Episcopal Mission. on, Fourth and Pine. Every day we serve, over the course of a year, we serve, between 13 and 16,000 community meals. We provide food through our food pantry, and everyone here is welcome at both of those places. Every winter, we receive requests from friends and neighbors who we know closely through the community meals and food pantry looking for emergency shelter. Many of those folks are living outside year round and only seek shelter in the worst conditions because they prefer to live outside for a variety of reasons. We also get requests from folks who have lost housing. As Tim suggested, maybe there's been a domestic fight, and the best way to leave is to separate, and they need a place to be for a few days. We've had folks who've had their homes burned down and had no family or friends to turn to, and came to us looking for hotels. I've had probation officers call and ask if we could put someone up for a few days while they sorted out next steps. It's hard for us at St. George to say no. These folks are part of our community, but providing emergency shelter is not our primary mission. So this work that Advocates is doing, when I heard about it, I gave a shout, a very loud shout of thanks to God that this work is starting to happen in Leadville, because it will help St. George do what we do well, which is provide food. The thing I'd like to close with is that all the requests that we get come from people we know. They're friends and neighbors and important parts of this community. They're volunteers at St. George. Some are regulars at St. George, some we just see occasionally. So I urge you to look at this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list, Lisa, DeWalney. Apologies for mispronunciations.
Lisa Downey, 331 West Second Street. This is my neighborhood you're talking about. I've done a little research. None of our surrounding communities have a facility like this. They deal with it differently, so I would prefer that we not have a facility and that they look into other ways to deal with this problem. They seem to do it with vouchers to put them somewhere else. That's all. And another thing, I know my time's, it's a 1960 building. I'm not sure it would meet building codes as far as emergency exits, egress on windows, that sort of thing. So that should be looked into also. I don't want to see the city getting sued.
Richard Simons.
Hello, my name's Richard Simons, 226 West Second Street. So when I heard about this, I did a quick Google search and there was a link to University of Pennsylvania, Department of Criminology. And they did a study specifically on emergency winter shelters. This was in Vancouver. And they found that within 100 meters, there was 56.3% increase in crime. I can get more specific, but I don't have enough time probably. After 9 AM, where are they gonna go? I know you said some of them had jobs, but I feel like sometimes some of that information was kind of contradictory. What factual data is there to prove that this is, the homeless people are undercounted? Or is it just a feeling? If they don't get referred and showed up and aren't local, will they be turned away? And then what will they do when they're turned away? You know, I live like right on the corner of Spruce and 226, like on Spruce and Second, so it doesn't really, it doesn't really get much closer than that. What's to stop this from becoming a full-time shelter in the future? And they mentioned their ideal scenario. I'm just curious what that is. And if they mentioned the building getting dozed down, are they planning on rebuilding it for the same purpose and expanding? I know that in that document prepared, there was an email saying that I think it was a city inspector approved it for 50 people, even though the fire marshal only said 25, and they were gonna push. To have that max of 25 people increase to 50. And. I'll just leave it at that.
Jamie Burton.
Hello, my name is Jean Burton. I live at 117 Lighter. There's a lot of vague language in this proposal. Examples, these are quotes from it. Providing shelter and residential services to clients generally from 5 p.m. to 9:30 a.m. That can change at any time, but the word generally put in there. Staff understands that some residents of the neighborhood may be concerned about reduced property values and increased crime. They're not worried about increased crime. Why are they having escorts by police for people that are evicted? I have 2 very young children and we live within a block of this. It says in the findings section, number 7, the proposed conditional use will not be likely to prove detrimental to public health. Not likely? That leaves a lot of room. It says, not likely to public health, safety, or welfare of city residents, nor cause hardship for neighboring persons. Not likely is not good enough for me, or my neighbors or friends or children. It also says its interior floor plan of distinct offerings would allow us to implement operations with more separation than your typical shelter. Hopefully minimizing the kinds of conflict that arise from such close quarter situations. Not preventing them, minimizing them. Also, it says, this is the staff, we are keenly, I have Rhonda's minutes, we are keenly attuned to the issues that arise from communal living and are experienced at mediating conflicts in such operations. So they're admitting the conflicts that happen in these shelters. If you look at the staff training list, CPR is one of them, but it's mediation of such conflicts, of mental health issues, of drug issues, and things of that nature. Providing a nasal spray in case someone overdoses. We have enough issues we need to solve in this community. We have limited resources that are being stretched thinner and thinner all the time. We are not doing anything to educate people, to empower people. We are giving handouts instead of hand up. When are we gonna start choosing to educate people in order to get them out of these situations or to help them through these situations? Or are we just gonna keep pouring money into these situations and not having any result? As was said, there's gonna be more and more homeless people because we're not doing the educational piece enough. Thank you.
Jeremy Barada. My name is Jeremy Burns, I live at 117 Lighter Avenue. And I'm opposed to this measure passing. As my wife already eloquently put, there's holes in this proposal. It is vague, it leaves room for. We're gonna change this, no, this is gonna be a storage room. No, now it's gonna be a dormitory. And if this building is from 1960, is there lead? Is there asbestos? How much is this remodel gonna cost? And if this building is proposed to be torn down in the next 2 to 3 years, why do we want to invest that kind of money and that kind of infrastructure only to be torn down? Like I said, my wife said, we have 2 little kids at home. We already have cameras on our houses because our vehicle's been vandalized in our parking areas at our house. I read that article that Richard sent me, 56% increase. I said, if you build it, they will come
If you're gonna offer beds, the people who will be there, are they gonna screen these people? Are they gonna do background checks? Are you gonna fingerprint them and find out, are they violent offenders? Are they sex offenders? What steps are we gonna take to protect the people who live here? I don't know, and can you answer who's funding this? Where the funding is gonna come from? Is this taxpayer dollars that's gonna be flown into this to build this? I don't want it in my backyard for myself, for my children, for my neighbors, for my potential neighbors. I understand people go through hardships, but if you're choosing to stay here, that's a choice. People can leave, they can uproot and move. We did to come here for life, and if it's not working out, then maybe you seek life elsewhere. But it just doesn't seem an adequate use of resources, an adequate source of money. Just consider that, please.
Ellen Bransford.
I'm on Rancho, I live at 140 West 4th Street. And I'm here to speak in support of David's proposal. Both on behalf of my work at C4 and also as a neighbor and even a sister. So in my work at C4, Plaza View Conservation Center, I've seen just how precarious so many of our residents' housing situations are. Especially as our wages, local wages have not kept up with our soaring cost of living. We see far too many hardworking locals who are at risk of being priced out of their housing. You know, and we're trying to support them at C4 because so many of the 212 households that we've served through our energy program in the past year, they're, you know, hardworking families and they're our community members, and they're unfortunately just a single utility bill away from eviction or a maintenance issue away from defaulting on their mortgage. And to other people's points, you know, we are working to empower and educate and prevent these situations from happening to begin with. We don't want these crises to be happening. And to somebody else's comment about supporting and protecting the people that live here, these are people that live here. There are community members, there are students in our schools, they're, you know, employees of local businesses. They're keeping our economy going, and that's what we're trying to do here is empower, educate, and protect them. I also support it as a neighbor, living right down next to St. George. I've had nothing but positive interactions with a lot of the community members that could be served by this plan. In fact, at my house in the past year, the only negative interactions I've had are police chase at Boom Days, drunk tourists packed into short-term rentals and Airbnbs, and then fighting the race series and high-priced traffic for parking. So I don't see any issues coming from that.
Your time limit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob Viho.
My name is Bobby Hill, 217 West Second Street. And the property that we're talking about is 217 West Second Street. It's a residential area. And I would recommend that we don't change it to a conditional use permit. That's fine.
Aaron Lewis.
My name's Aaron Lewis. I live at 401 West Third Street, just a block away from this. I'm in strict opposition. I'd like to read something that Representative Armagas for the Colorado legislature put out today. Colorado is third most dangerous state in the country, #1 in bank robbery, 2nd in car theft, 4th in property crime, #4 in rape, 8th highest violent crime rate in the nation, #1 in cocaine use, 10th highest rate of human trafficking, 3rd in drug use and addiction, 6th most regulated state. #1 state for restaurant price inflation, most expensive state to live in, 6th worst state to retire in. Coloradans need $15,000 more now to maintain 2021 standard of living. The 9th worst state for individuals to save money. 6th most expensive state for car insurance. Number 4 in road rage. Number 7 worst state for new business survival. And homelessness increased 30% in 2024. Denver ranked first city to raise a family. And Colorado ranked 40th, down from 9th. In 2023 inbound migration. I've lived here for 23 years. I served Leadville Lake County Fire Rescue for 8.5, and now I'm a lieutenant for Eagle River Fire Rescue. I left the fire department here because standard of living kept increasing and couldn't afford a wage, so I sought employment elsewhere. Now I've gone 2 days minimum a week from my house where my wife lives, which is a block away. And if any of this so-called homelessness resorts to crime, I'm not there to protect her. And as we know, when seconds count, the police are only 10 minutes away. Thank you.
Zach, last name starts with B.
My name is Zachary Gilbert, I live at 529 West Second. I'm speaking in opposition of the homeless shelter. In my limited experience actually living near a homeless shelter in Denver. It's a safe haven for drugs and alcohol use. There was typically a substantial amount of crime around there. Pretty much if things weren't bolted down, chained down, or welded down, it was stolen by somebody. I tend to believe it was because of that. You go in any direction, you didn't see that issue very much. I'm a new father. My daughter is 2 years old, 2.5. I don't really, I work long hours up at the mine. I'm not really in favor of being away from my daughter for that amount of time and thinking about what might be going on here in my home.
Rhonda H.
She gave us first.
Okay. Lindsay C.
Hello, my name is Lindsay Kuhn. I live at 211 Stargazer Circle, Leadville. I am an RN case manager at St. Vincent Health. In the past year, I've reached out to the advocates several times. But for the most part, they haven't been able to help me with homeless patients that have presented to the hospital. These are patients that have either been admitted to our ACU or in the emergency department. And so these patients have nowhere to go. So just simply say that we've seen a need in the community for a resource such as this project. Thank you.
Mario C.
Mario Cordova, living at 603 Elm Street. I'm actually moved from Tucson, Arizona, where that is a growing issue. Drugs, homelessness, due to that same reason, drugs. And I have my own family, I have a wife, 3 kids. And I moved them away from that because of that growing issue. I want them to grow up somewhere peaceful and I don't have to worry about someone breaking in or people walking around jonesing. Cause I mean, I work at the mine also 12, 16 hours straight sometimes. I want to be able to, you know, expect that my kids and my wife will be fine at home. Not have to worry about anything. I could just work, provide for my family, be able to pay and afford the place I'm living at right now.
Heather M.
Hello, my name's Heather, me too. I'm at 2699 County Road 17 in Leadville. I currently am a probation officer in Lake County, but I'm the founding principal for Cloud City High School, the alternative school. I have seen students and probationers and other community members lose their housing, and that really throws a wrench in their recovery efforts, their education efforts, their efforts to become rehabilitated and back to contributing members of our community. The predictability of a emergency shelter could allow for less disruption to them accessing the exact resources that they need for education, employment, and recovery. It links them to more referrals for those supports that are necessary to heal, lift up our community members. Anytime we can support a community member, especially with the building that currently sits vacant, we should seize that opportunity. I'm in support of this. Thank you.
Steve P.
My name is Steve Prestash. I've lived in this community since 1980. The reason I come to these government meetings is I'm terrified of Mr. Labbe and his realtor associates taking my home from me. The reason I'm not on that board is because of an emotional response when they had to the application for this board. Because I spoke against Mr. Labbe.
I'm going to.
I would like to continue.
The beginning,
I just need to
the
say
beginning of this public hearing,
I have 2 minutes, right?
you do, and we will pause and we will continue to allow your time. But I'm going to read the statement again that was introduced at the beginning of the meeting. All participants are encouraged to employ respectful language and conduct themselves in a manner that will uphold the dignity of the commission, the applicant, staff, and the members of the public. So if you can comment on the criteria of the application, we'll please, if you please do that, we'll resume your time. Thank you.
I don't see where I've been disrespectful.
I'm reminding you of the requirements for public comment.
Okay, so I haven't been respectful yet.
We'll resume your time, you have seen.
Okay, and then I was volunteer at St. George, so I'm not sure how much time I have left now. This is throwing me off.
5 seconds,
How many?
52 seconds.
I'm no longer a volunteer at St. George's because St. George's was supporting theft of resources there by the employees. But I'm in both support this with cautions that mentally ill individuals that live in our community that are addicted to drugs, that there be close police monitoring of the facility, and that the police be allowed to have a direct access to the cameras, and that there be a 1-year storage of the data. Thank you kindly.
Tim D.
My name is Tim Dunning, property owner at 230 West Second Street, stuck in home. I understand I'm part of the problem as far as the house goes. I appreciate the work that Advocates is doing. I think it's necessary in a community of this size. However, by the applicant's presentation, I got the impression that this facility is undersized for the need. I also think that it is pretty far away from the grocery store, the laundromat, like a lot of other services that are already in the community that are important. I believe that there is quite likely a need for these services. I feel like the plan leaves a lot to be interpreted and a lot that could change. That I think it needs to be better defined, and I don't feel that this site fits the needs of the community already. Thank you.
Thurman H.
Thurman Havercorn, 139 West 4th Street. I've lived next to St. George's for about 30 years since I was a kid. Our streets are quiet. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate what St. George's does and the fact that we do need something like this in our community. I think the location choice is poor. If the building's due to be torn down, then there's no point in raising something up that will be gone in a year or two. If it takes you a year to get it done. On top of that, if this is publicly funded at all. I disagree with it entirely. We are already strained enough that we can't fix the simplest of potholes in this town. So that being said, if we can't even fix our streets that we put forth our tax money to, I don't see why we have to bring these people up. If they want to privately fund it, they can buy a piece of property, they can pay property tax, and they can have it where they want. But I will vote against it being in a residential neighborhood where our kids play and brings more foot traffic, which involves more conflict. As you said, we do have a lot of tourists who come to this town, they party, they like to tie one on, and they are also cruising these streets the same time that these people will generally be walking around these areas. I don't need fights in my alleyways. St. George's is great. The foot traffic it brings to my street is unbearable. My fire hydrant is constantly parked in front of, constantly. My driveway is parked in constantly. I find a mess behind my house regularly, whether it's needles or alcohol. I find it in my alley. Trust me, I appreciate what you do, but trust me, there's a dark side to it too. And once you open those doors, they aren't gonna get shut very easily. Thank you.
Could you give me your name again, please?
Thurman, have it.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to provide public comment in chambers? Please. Back around.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Abbott. I'm the executive director, excuse me, of the Advocates of Lake County. Just want to thank everyone for coming out here tonight and speaking so openly and candidly about your concerns. We have a lot of conversations to have, and we are going to talk about a lot of these things. In the interim, though, I just want to assure you guys that we are following best practice established at a national level. We are not reinventing the wheel. The policies that we have lined up here are evidence-based. We know they work. Having an emergency crisis component of a much larger picture, a much larger approach that Tim outlined in his presentation is necessary for, as we said, there are times when we're working on getting someone into housing and we're just not quite there yet. We don't want them to die from exposure in the process of finding their housing. That's why this is necessary, again, of a much larger picture. We're working really, really hard and we've been very successful thus far. We just want to keep doing this work. I also just want to emphasize that these people are already here. These are our friends and families, family members. We do have a residency requirement for the transitional housing program, and that tends to dissuade people from coming up. So we're literally talking about people who, your friends and family, who don't have a credit card to go to a hotel room. And this is the next thing. This is a crisis, emergency, gap filler safety net. This is not the long-term solution. So please keep that in mind, that this is just part of our solution. And I look forward to a lot more discussions in coming months. Thanks so much.
There's another in chambers? Yeah, please. Oh, sorry. Maybe over, apologies.
My name is Bill Korn. I live at 208 West 8th Street, and my daughters and I own property at 308 West 2nd Street and others in the near vicinity. I would like to suggest that what's being advocated is essentially an attractive nuisance. It will tend to bring people into the community that we probably just as soon not have here. I don't want to be too repetitive. You've heard a variety of opinions from people up here. I would like to point out that the people who have spoken against this are entirely people who have some association with the neighborhood and are people that many of them have lived here a long time. The people who speak for this, as near as I can make out, are entirely people who represent various social services. And I think there, the distinction needs to be clear. The community is not in favor of this. This is something that's been brought to us by people who essentially make their living off of supporting this sort of thing. I think the consequences of this will be deleterious, not just to the immediate neighborhood, but to the community at large. And I can speak to several instances that I've had personally with a variety of homeless people in this community that have damaged property and have taken enormous advantage of their neighbors. Thank you.
Anyone else in chambers? In person? Yes, Dr. Ryan, please.
Yeah, I'm Tony Sligo. I live at 414 West Second Street, been in Leadville for 56 years. Down in that neighborhood for 26 years now. I don't have any kids down there, my neighbors do. I just don't think it's the right place for a homeless shelter. I mean, they can call it what they wanna call it, but that's what it's gonna be, is a homeless shelter. It's not gonna be a short-term thing, there's gonna be people that are gonna stay in there and be in there for how long? I don't think the building is adequate either, I mean. They're talking about tearing it down, so. Tear it down and find someplace else not in a residential area, to build something like that. And I agree with Bill Corner, I think the people that are pushing this, that's their jobs in this town, is to push this agenda. The people that live down there, everybody I've talked to, they don't want it in that neighborhood. So, unless you want it in your neighborhood. Move it over to your house, I don't want it in my neighborhood. Thank you.
Back in the room, please.
My name's Jim Mosley from the school district. I just want to clarify that there are no current plans to demolish the building. The northern half of that building is our maintenance facility. Until we find a new one or buy a new one, and we have no plans right now to do that. We'll need to keep that building, so there are no plans to demolish it.
Any other comments? Yes, I'm gonna defer to anyone else who has not had an opportunity to speak, please.
Well, my name is Diego Gonzalez. I am here in support of the proposed homeless shelter or emergency shelter in Leadville. I speak as the operations manager at St. George Episcopal Mission Community Meals and Pantry, and considering my time spent working directly in the food pantry. I'd like to echo the statement made by our pastor, Melissa. At St. George, I've seen firsthand the need for resources for our unhoused neighbors. I regularly interact with individuals experiencing homelessness. And it is clear that a shelter in Leadville will provide critical immediate relief. Providing a shelter is the bare minimum we can do to ensure the health and safety of those who are struggling. Homelessness can happen to anyone, and oftentimes it is beyond control. Job loss, medical emergencies, family issues, or rising housing costs. I believe a community thrives when we care for the most vulnerable among us. I think this initiative is essential, and I strongly urge its approval. Thank you.
Anyone else has not had a chance to speak in chambers? We will go to our Zoom participants, and then if anyone wants to provide secondary comments, I'll leave that up to the chair. We'll go to our Zoom participants next, and then come back to chambers. Yeah, we're going to, yes, okay. Is there a last name? Fishman. Okay, we'll go with Susan F.
Thank you. I'm Susan Fishman, 612 East 11th Street. I've been here 23 years, and I am hearing a lot of fear in the room, and I recognize that there are fears. I want to say that I have been volunteering at St. George for over 7 years. I do not make a living. I'm a volunteer, and I've gotten to know many of the people at St. George. As you have heard, not all, but several of the referrals and community members that might take advantage of this temporary shelter for the cold spend time at the church. And I have been there on a fairly regular basis, like I say, for over 7 years, and I have never felt any fear. I think the advocates have done a thorough research to make sure this is well supervised facility, and have really, I've been on I was part of the homelessness subcommittee since the beginning. And so I have raised my questions on how to make this a safe facility, to make sure there's the proper supervision. And I want to remind us that, as Tim shared, this is not the long-term solution. This is crisis as they work on housing our unhoused. And I just want to share from one of our homeless friends in our community who camps out year round. He emailed me this morning and said, the official NOAA temperature at the Leadville airport this morning was -10. At 2:30 a.m., it was too cold to stay in my sleeping bag. So I started walking to town to get indoors somewhere. I wanted to share that from somebody who's homeless. Thank you for your time. And I hope that you will support this initiative.
Next, we'll go to Zoom participant, labeled as TNT.
Hi, my name's Tina Takansik. I live in Leadville on the west side. So I just have a few questions. Lake County Build a Generation is the one that put out the survey. So I'm just wondering how they arrived at who was provided this survey. That building was built in 1960. It's been vacant for 3 years. So it doesn't meet the building codes. There's not enough bathrooms in there to house. So it's like, how much money is it going to cost and who's going to pay for it if this goes through? That's it.
Thank you. Next, we will go to Carrie Q.
Hi there, everyone. I live at Carrie Quinlan. I live at 135 Chestnut Street, so I live just over a block from the site. And I want to speak out in support of this shelter. In my early career, I worked in inpatient and community mental health. I also worked in homelessness services. I was really, really impressed by the presentation tonight. And I also just want to say that I think the Advocates is one of the most trusted entities in the community. And I feel like they will do a really thorough job and be responsive to community concerns. So yeah, I'd like to encourage support for this.
If there are any other Zoom participants who'd like to speak, please raise your hand. Virtually. Last call for anyone on Zoom to raise their hand to speak. We're going to give this 30 seconds just in case anyone's experiencing technical difficulties. Chair, while we're waiting, Vice Chair, do you want to accept any additional public comment? We are at 8 o'clock. 3 minutes.
Timing wise, I would like to move on. So in terms of doing that, can we move into applicants rebuttal?
Yes.
One time.
Yes.
Because I think that might be enlightening for a lot of people.
Okay, so wait, all right, so at this time, we're going to close the public comment for Zoom participants.
And at this point in time, I'd like to have the applicants rebuttal.
All right, and have we given everyone in the room an opportunity and on Zoom an opportunity to speak at least once?
Has everybody had their opportunity for their piece?
I could add a little bit more. Now, we have a lot of work to do. I'm gonna recommend that we stick to one public comment.
Just one public comment at this point in time.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move.
Who was at the back that wanted to speak?
Yeah.
I think we're gonna allow one more public
I
comment.
would like to make one more comment.
So I would like to. We're gonna stop public comment at this point in time.
This is, staff recommends that we stick to one public comment. And this is not the final hearing. There will be a second.
For each person, I see what you're saying.
For each person.
Sorry about that.
So I think we can get some clarification from the applicant's rebuttal. Which might give some greater insight to some of those questions and concerns. Okay.
Thank you. So I'm going to keep this pretty short because I feel that I addressed a lot of these issues in my presentation. To the crime study, which you really want to look at is meta-analyses, which take a whole group of studies and compare results and come up with a determination of consistency. So I've looked at 3 large meta-analyses that these are groups of 25 plus studies. You Google a little further, you look a little further down the search results, you'll find these. That find that there is no consistent correlation between a homeless shelter and crime rates or rising property values. Now, the reason they find no correlation is because the results are all over the map. You can certainly find studies that show that there's a correlation, and you can find. I found personally in my own Google search 4 times that number that found no correlation. Well, that's inconclusive. That means that the likelihood that crime and high property values are associated with something other than the homeless shelter is high. So I would encourage you to look a little deeper, look at the meta-analyses, and look at a vast body of Google search results, and not just find one study that shows what you want it to show. I can assure everybody that as of now, no local funding has been attributed to this. We were funded by 2 DOLA grants from the state primarily, and then through foundation grants, and then community fundraising. I think the exception locally would be things like the community fund and our own fundraising efforts. I think a lot of the fear, which I acknowledge as well, is based on false assumptions of who the clientele will be serving is. And I just want to repeat that, I'll repeat the referral process, that these are clients who are known to us and known to our partner organizations within the coordinated entry system. They will be discussed at case conferencing, and primarily beds will be filled that way. The idea that this is going to be some sort of magnet for vagrants and transients, I just don't find persuasive at all. I think that addresses all that I want to address. I want to repeat what Jenny said, that we look forward to an ongoing conversation. We view this as the beginning of the process. Nothing's going to be operational anytime soon. There will be plenty of time for community feedback. I invite all the neighbors present to come to an open house at the shelter, look at our site plan, talk about our operations plan. A lot of the answers to your questions are in our operations plan. So with that, I'm going to yield.
Okay.
You officially, have you closed the public comment?
I have not officially closed it,
Okay, please do that.
but yeah, at this point in time, I'm going to close the public comment portion. Move on to staff clarification and rebuttal.
Staff just has 2 clarifications. So one, this commission is tasked, and we don't have we have a quorum, we don't have all commissioners here tonight. This commission is tasked with making a recommendation based on code criteria. And we'll remind the commission there is a public hearing held at city council, the next city council meeting. City council is the decision maker. Your criteria is in your staff report. The only clarification, just based on public comments tonight, that is hopefully helpful, is that the Lake County Building Department, we have an intergovernmental agreement. The city of Leadville has an intergovernmental agreement with Lake County to use their building department for all building code requirements. So your evaluation tonight is based on the zoning requirements, not the building code requirements. Following this conditional use permit, there will be, and this is a condition of approval that's included in this, for this conditional use permit, staff is recommending any building permit requirements, including fire code, et cetera, will be implemented and enforced by the Lake County Building Department. Thank you.
Thanks. At this point in time, questions, comments from the planning and zoning commissioners? Present?
I feel like I've had most of what questions I might have had. I do have one. We talked about there will be another public hearing. Would you please clarify that?
Yes, so this is it's called a quasi judicial application. So it's not legislative like an ordinance. This is a proposal, and the commission and council has to review it based on code. So the code, so the Planning and Zoning Commission is a recommending body, not a decision-making body. So tonight, your task is to make a recommendation based on code compliance to City Council. City Council will hold a public hearing on, I believe that's Tuesday, January 21st at 6 p.m. There will be multiple items on the agenda. This will be one of the items. So there will be a public hearing for City Council to hear your recommendation, hear staff's summary of this hearing, and a summary of the staff's analysis of the code. And then again, public comment, so any member of the public, even if they provided comment tonight, or even if they did not, can provide public comment at that prior to a decision being made by city council.
Will city council be privy to all the comments that were made tonight?
Yes, we will include the minutes from this meeting in the city council packet. And the audio recording, the Zoom recording will be available online as well.
Okay, so to clarify, like, I liked the comment about police surveillance and things like that. That's something city council would deal with, or, you know, if they had any issues with that, that's not something we need to discuss right now, for instance, because it has nothing to do with code, right?
I would say that,
Or zoning.
you know, staff is giving you an evaluation of the code and then some draft conditions of approval. And again, conditions are typical to add to a conditional use permit. So that's a starting point for you. It doesn't mean that those have to be the exact conditions that you recommend tonight to council. So, and I'll give you a page number for those conditions in your packet, but if those conditions, if the commission finds, as part of your motion tonight, if you're recommending approval and you find that those conditions need to be modified, whether you're striking things or whether you're adding things, that is appropriate for you to do with your recommendation.
In terms of adding additional items, like, I know you mentioned the security element there is, for the applicant is.
Is a question for the applicant?
Yeah, this is a question for the applicant. In terms of clarifying, like, what security type.
Yes.
And that's like,
If you could please,
Yeah.
thank you.
if you could address that in some way, that'd be great.
The exterior of the premises will be protected by 5 surveillance cameras with a live feed. It's the same one that we use at the Bridge House on Fifth Street and at the other shelter that the advocates currently runs. The interior will be covered by 3 security cameras covering all open group areas. In addition to that, Leadville Police Department has agreed to enhance patrol in the area. And I think that's all, unless you have further questions. The shelter itself will also have access to our crisis hotline.
And who, like, looks after the feed?
Who looks after the feed?
Yeah, the, like, is that?
Well, the feed isn't the monitor, the
Yeah.
feed is reflected upon it. So
Sorry.
all staff have access to the feed, but the feed isn't constantly monitored. The feed is something that reference to.
Got
it. It's,
Yeah, thank you.
it's a preventative.
Yeah, other question I had was like, in terms of like the onboarding process, like, do you expect everybody to, it's within an hour and a half window and like an hour departure? Like, how does that work, or what does that look like?
We don't know what to expect, but I mean, we have our declared window of departure and we're going to enforce that. There's, I think the neighbors would be heartened by looking at the rules and expectations in the operational plan that include, no loitering clause, no sleeping in vehicles, and other things like that. They'll all be enforced by shelter staff.
I had a question regarding, you mentioned like 90, that you had 95 referrals. Is that over the, like, how many, is that over like 6 months, or, I'm just kind of.
That's over 9 months.
Over 9 months, is it like how many per week, or I don't know if you break it down?
Well, as I said in my presentation, that number has doubled in the last 3 months.
Okay.
So that means over 6 months, we had about 47, and then in the last 3 months, we've had about 40.
You had that.
As it got older.
Sorry.
Was it, sorry.
Yes, as it got colder. So those run the gamut of. So for example, for homelessness prevention, we have clients in the Tabor whose rents went up, who are elderly and on Social Security, and their Social Security obviously didn't go up, so we're able to bridge that gap for them. So, that's why I said in the presentation, the bucket of prevention is the most cost-effective and effective way to stop homelessness. Some of those fall into the transitional housing bucket and need like several months of housing in order to get onto their feet. We've been very successful in moving folks into stable housing under their own lease. And then there's the street outreach folks, and then there's also the folks that actually just need shelter.
I had a question. I was just curious, you had mentioned that this would be like kind of obviously this is a temporary solution. And do you have a plan, or are you working on a plan, or like, what is the long-term vision for a larger facility? Do you have any?
Yeah, Jenny Harris, our executive director, can speak to that, probably more specifically, but, you know, when I say that this isn't the forever home, we are working on a larger project. When I say working, I mean, it's early stages. The housing solutions that the whole community is working on are gonna take years to materialize. It's gonna take us 5, 10, 15 years to address our housing crisis, at which point it probably will grow anyway. But our long-term planning is for an advocates facility that includes offices, permanent supportive housing, and a shelter.
Thank you.
Anything else, Greg?
I have no questions, I have some thoughts, but no questions right now.
If there are no further questions, the commission can either have a discussion amongst yourselves prior to a motion, or someone can make a motion and you can have a discussion.
What motions are available to us?
Motions would be to approve the conditions, deny with findings, or motion for a continuance.
We're tasked supposedly with making a determination based on code and zoning. I have to tell you, I'm not really willing to do that. I don't know how else to put it. I have such deep respect for the advocates, and I love what St. George's does. And we need a solution, there is no doubt about it. But I'm compelled by what I've heard tonight to also understand that what I think is at some point is not important. Listening to our community is what is important. And if I didn't learn anything else in 8 years serving the city, I learned that. So I don't think, it is my opinion, that in the findings, number 7, is based on what I've heard from the community, is not met. So I can understand where we send this to city council, but I would like for it to state that I think, finding number 7 is inadequate and very likely problematic. First, just so you know, I'll read what number 7 says. The proposed conditional use permit, and this is the finding, it was not likely to prove detrimental to public health, safety, or welfare of city residents, nor cause hardship for neighboring persons. I don't find that compelling. You know, and I apologize to St. George's and the advocates. I love you guys. I love what you do. But based on everything I heard tonight, if we forward this to city council, I would do it with the recommendation that they look long and carefully at number 7 and listen to the community.
So that'd be a recommendation for approval with the concern that it doesn't find number 7.
So what is that? That's why I asked the question. I'm not quite sure where to go with that in terms of but I'd like to hear from the other members of the committee.
I think one thing that I've been thinking about is, and I hear Tim on, you know, he understands his people clientele who's coming and going. I'm just kind of like scenario thinking, like, what happens if one business fails and that business employs like 10 single people without families? Right, and I'm thinking of parking, sorry, this is where I'm going with the conditional thing, is like, is that enough? Do we need to actually push to have a conditional use for more parking in a scenario where, you know, it's unforeseen? Like, we don't know, right now, we can tell what it looks like based on, you know, clientele, but what happens in a future scenario, like, by the time this is up and running in November, presumably. something that happens that requires, us to, we should actually be the code, I think. With this situation like that.
In terms of talking about code and all that stuff, in terms of like map density and. I think it's half of what. I think we were talking 20, like half of what our code specifies in terms of what's allowable in that code. So I thought that was kind of an interesting point.
But our code can't supersede the fire department's recommendation.
Yeah, but in terms of remediation and remodeling, like these structures can be retooled.
I didn't mean to ask what they estimated work was needed to get it to code. Can we ask that still? I'm just curious, Tim, do you have any idea of what the estimated work is gonna take to get this?
The design plan that's in your packet, it's, in order to get it just simply up to code and operational, that's not much at all. We plan on installing one shower in one of the bathrooms, there are currently 2 bathrooms. We have to take care of the egress issues that were mentioned because it's such an old building, that wasn't required back then. So other fire code issues like extinguishers, smoke alarms, our security system, and then furnish the place, that's basically it.
And all this has to be run through the Lake County.
The building, right, yeah.
Building, it's all permitted. And then you have to carry it. Hey, Tim, I was just curious, were there any other sites by chance?
No. No, so I've been working on this since I started in February. We have looked at 2 other sites that were just not feasible. The attraction of this building is that it's currently unused and we have a willing landlord.
I don't know.
Yeah,
This is really tough.
You know where I stand at this point.
So the difficulty with the planning and zoning commission is that, like, we're working within the parameters of what's actually like in our code, and we just put forward a recommendation primarily on, like, well, what's in our planning code. And then we try to like do some accommodations to that if need be. Which really poses some challenges sometimes.
Here's the deal, we are a referral agency. We are not a decision-making agency. We can send this to city council with our recommendations. My recommendation is it does not meet all the parameters. And that's what I would like to see presented to city council. They're gonna have to decide, they're gonna have to listen to the people in this room, both pro and con. And then make a decision, on that. We don't make the decision, we make the recommendation. That's why
that's the rub.
The motion, get it rolling so we can go.
But then you didn't want to stay. Lisa, come on, this is so much fun.
It's a 2-way street here, so let's.
Yeah, we want to go home too.
How are you feeling on things?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree that at the end, this isn't like we're not making the final decision.
Right.
From a planning and zoning perspective, right, like. I don't see why we wouldn't push it through to see what city council can then. Explore like the community issues.
Well, it goes with it no matter what.
Yeah.
These are recommended for.
I just mean from the plans, we don't have.
Recommended with conditions, that's it. One possibility, I know this is a terrible idea, let's hear it, that's close to my heart. We could do a continuation and allow a second public hearing on this. Although, me personally, I don't think that would accomplish much, but I'm just saying that's something to think about.
I would offer that, if you were to make a motion for a continuance, that you would need to indicate, the reason for the continuance.
And that should be based on the fact that you need more information from the applicant in order to evaluate compliance with code. That should be if you do a continuance, that should be the reason.
I'm not inclined to do that, but I would just say that's, it's a possibility.
I'm not in favor of doing it.
Okay, all right.
And mainly because like the applicant is working within the parameters of the code in terms of use by right. But I would be in favor of moving it to city council so they can deliberate.
Oh, I totally agree with that. I just, what we say to city council to me is going to be important in terms of sending it to them, yes.
Yeah, so are there any other things other than 0.7? I did like that. That was a good thing to red flag.
There are a couple of there that seem a little iffy. Harmony with the neighboring land uses. I don't know. I think these are things city council needs to take into serious consideration.
Well, I think that's the kind of the gist of it, like if we work around item number 7. In terms of putting that into a condition, moving that forward.
Yes,
Yeah,
I would be okay with that.
yeah. Would you be willing to make a motion?
I'm gonna give it a try.
Okay, then.
Is there a motion in here somewhere?
I have some draft motion language, that you'll probably need to modify it.
Yeah.
Just the one thing in my report, I did mention that P and Z is part of this recommendation, should recommend what their parking requirement is. That's like the only criteria that, I guess, if you're, as part of that, your approval or denial and the finding, you should state what the parking requirement is and whether that is met or not.
What if I don't care about the parking requirement? Does that help? Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, defaulting on, if you did not state anything about the parking requirement, you basically would be saying that it meets the parking requirement.
Do you have a motion crafted?
Yes, let's look at page 13 of your packet. And you'll have to just modify it based on whether you're approving it or denying it. If you're making a motion for approval, then you would reference the findings and conditions. If you're making a motion for denial, you would just reference the findings. Specifically saying that 7 is struck, it doesn't apply. You're finding that it doesn't meet that.
Where you do that? Do you mind if I just finish reading a couple things just before?
So will that need 2 motions or 1 motion that includes parking?
Just one motion. If you find that it meets the parking requirements, you don't have to say anything about parking.
There's 11 spots.
11 spots.
Yeah, with the problem parking. All right. Commissioner Lobby moves that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend to City Council that this application has met the zoning requirements, but that requirements in the code, requirements number 3 and 7 seem problematic and have been spoken extensively in opposition to by the public at this hearing. In addition, I know I'm not gonna do this right, but in addition, we feel that the parking requirements and the parking that has been proposed are likely adequate to the application.
Any concerns?
Oh, probably, but I'm.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think you need to be clear whether, you need to just use the words approval or denial. In your
I
motion.
didn't want to do that on purpose. Sorry.
I think that's your charge,
yeah, that's,
is you're recommending either approval or denial. I think you can use the language in your motion, but just please indicate whether that's a motion or approval or denial.
I would say for me, and the other commissioners may disagree, I'm recommending disapproval based on criteria number 3 and number 7 of the code.
Thank you.
Second.
So there's a motion on the floor.
Second.
Okay, motion dies.
let's give it a minute.
They're gonna, they have to decide.
I understand that.
So now we can enter a discussion after a motion, that's normal.
Well, I think you have got a second before you have a discussion.
So I'll second the motion.
Okay, who's got?
And so this will then go to city council on January 21st. For this recommendation.
Yes, I'm just gonna 100% confirm that date.
Okay.
I also think we should
Yes.
asterisk to city council, how many people are in the quorum. Just so you know.
I can include that in the memo. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes it.
You know,
More
just so you know,
because we don't have full participation by the commission, that's unfortunate.
So Greg, we actually have to vote.
Oh, we do. Okay.
Any further discussion before roll call? All right, call for roll call, please. Shall we do roll call?
Yes, please.
Okay. Vice Chair Buller, I'm sorry, Vice Chair Bauer,
Yes.
Commissioner Janus,
Yes.
Commissioner Lottie.
Yes.
Motion passes for disapproval.
I have to tell you, this was very difficult. Because I so admire what they're trying to do. But this is something what it is right now.
So I need it, because this is a quasi judicial. I need to finish up here. I close the public hearing. Thank you.
Just give one. Before we conclude our meeting.
It's nice to see you this morning.
I'd say thank you, but I'm not allowed to do that.
To get more public comment too.
Yes.
Yeah, I was like.
Yeah.
Before everybody leaves the room, I really want to encourage you to, if you want to be heard, city council is a decision-making body. You have to be heard there.
We'll be here, and that table might need to be moved, because there's gonna be a lot.
And also, look, it means there is a planning zone, this is an advisory. I mean, you pay attention to it. I don't know if you remember, I used to be chairman of the planning zone, twice.
What? That's what we have a good point.
Thanks for your thought, Mr. Greg.
I recently got our plan back in 91 to try to convince them not to stop. And then we had to, so they did, I was a total mess. I had to come back, I had to get back on the board and had told 3 years later. Because.
Yeah,
We're gonna resume the needed meeting.
Public meeting in 1 minute. There are other items on the agenda.
We're still in session. So if you want to remain for the rest of the meeting,
Not right now.
you can.
I can beat you up.
If you would like to exit, this would be a great time.
Scott, I have the development sheet.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, we are on number 6.
Number 6, and that's, what page is that again?
Two, I apologize, we are on number 5.
Sorry.
Where is, let's get to this. We are on number 5.
All right, number 5, general staff updates.
Staff has none.
Excellent updates from commissioners. Any?
Not a chance.
Great. Moving on, public comment, items not on the agenda.
Good meeting.
We're gonna limit it to 2 minutes tonight because we're going way late.
So we'll go to any members of the public in council chambers. Hey, now get your seat.
What an audience is. My name is Steve Prestash, it's on the 5, I live at 131 3rd Street. I gave Mayor Lave, I gave Mayor Green an article from the Denver Post, which had an interview with the New Mexico governor. And she was talking about how she believed that the homeless crisis, they needed to start addressing the drug and mental illness issues. And it was a very good article, and I'd like to get a copy of that available for this board and as well as city council members. And then there was another article in the Denver Post that talked about the $1 million communities that we have in Colorado, and I'm a little vague on because I read it once. I think they said we had $20 million communities where houses sell for $20 million. And in Aspen, one property sold for $108 million. So where I'm going with this is I see this real estate whatever you want to call it, really does impact the communities where people live that are average people. I remember one time when I was at the bookstore, I can see I'm running out of time. Someone came in and asked me what the upstairs rooms were. And I said, well, people live there. He said, people. I said, yeah, regular people. And the guy laughed. He said, regular people. He said, this would be great for a timeshare. So we're getting really, yeah, I can see out of time. Thank you.
Steve, we're not gonna do goal setting tonight.
So 7A is just about the next meeting. Okay. Next meeting, goal setting, and we'll talk about the strategic plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned.
Yes, 8 o'clock. I mean, it needed to happen.
It needed to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, it wasn't the first time.
No, but I just really struggle with this because working